Hi. Hi, I'm Diane. I'm an alcoholic. And I want to thank the committee for inviting me. I want to thank Mary for helping me realize that this podium is on wheels so I don't push it off the side of the podium. I mean, I've fallen off podiums before. I've fallen downstairs. I've dropped a big book in a poor man's lap when I was speaking, and I'm not terribly coordinated. Sobriety hasn't helped that much. And I want to thank Lindy for reminding me why we're here and for being more scared than me. I mean, I hardly ever meet anyone who's more afraid of letting you know who they really are than I ever was. Speaking is not the thing I would rather do, to be quite honest with you. I don't mind after I get started, and I really don't mind once I'm done, but it's not my choice. Because when I was new, what I did is I sat way in the back, and I listened to people talk, and I judged them on whether they would stay sober or not, whether they should be alive or not, whether I liked their hair, their clothes, their shoes, and I gave them grades of 1 to 10. And there's got to be at least 10 or 20 of you like me. I mean, I would imagine. So I always have gotten nervous. And there was a man who was sober a long time ago who wrote the Members' Eye View, who always said that the reason that we're so self-conscious is because we care what everyone thinks. And I don't know that that ever goes away. What I do know is I don't care what you think enough not to be who I am and not to tell you the truth anymore, which is what God and Alcoholics Anonymous have given me. Because I didn't have that before. I did. I spent my first few years of AA lying. I mean, I lied about everything. In fact, I was sober 6 months, and one of the guys I knew said, "Why aren't you doing any work with the Indians?" Because I'd been an Indian for 10 years. But I didn't tell him I wasn't really an Indian. It was just when I got sober, I was. Because I had read that book, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, and I was so impressed, and I thought, these people deserve attention, and God knows I want it, so I was an Indian. I'm Czechoslovakian. Harder to say, but nonetheless, we have Lech Walesa, you know. Anyway, I am really glad to be here, and I do appreciate the people who have been helpful to me. Jeff came and picked me up at the airport and drove me out here. It was a beautiful drive, and I learned a great deal about your area. It's beautiful out here. I wouldn't want to live here, so don't get nervous, but because it's too hot, but it's very lovely here. And the reason that they asked me to come in and speak to you this morning is not because I enjoy traveling, and it's not because I enjoy speaking. It's because I have a problem with alcohol. And if I drink, you have a problem with alcohol. If I drink, anyone around me has a problem. I am not a good drinker, but it changed my life so radically when I first started that I did a lot of experimenting to keep drinking. You know, Tommy, you have some really nice legs there. Really nice. Anyway, sorry. When I was young, I'm not going to go back to when I was born because I really don't remember that, but when I was young, I do remember always feeling self-conscious. Always. I always knew that people were watching what I did. I never wanted to get up in public and go to the bathroom. I never wanted to do anything that could humiliate me. And a lot of things did. If you laughed at me in public, I was humiliated. I never knew how to get embarrassed. I always went straight for the bottom. I was deeply humiliated. So I quit doing a lot of things when I was young because I was afraid of what you would think of me, and God knows I couldn't afford to appear stupid in public. When I was 14 years old, somebody handed me the cutest bottle you have ever seen in your life, this little tiny bottle of peppermint schnapps. I mean, I got to tell you, I just love looking at the bottle. They gave me the bottle and they said, "Drink it. You will really like this." And being a person who enjoys peppermint, I took a drink. And I need to tell you, that's why I'm here. Because I liked what peppermint schnapps did for me more than I ever liked anything in my life. I liked the way I felt when I drank that bottle, and I must say bottle, they never got it back. I drank that bottle of peppermint schnapps because the first drink you take, it's like, you don't know quite what to expect. It's warm. It's like a candy cane. The second or third or fourth, I never could quite get the number right, but one of those drinks made me good, made me smart, made me funny, made me beautiful, made me not care. And that's where I was going. I just didn't want to feel all the time. I felt everything all the time, and I didn't want to. And when I drank peppermint schnapps, I didn't feel everything all the time. Pretty soon, I learned how to drink enough that I hardly felt anything, ever. And I started drinking tequila, and there wasn't a heck of a lot of difference between peppermint schnapps and tequila. That nasty little worm once in a while, but hardly ever noticeable after the first few drinks. And what alcohol allowed me to do is what I watched other people do. I mean, I went to school. They read today about loneliness, the loneliness of the alcoholic. Well, I was alone way before I ever drank. I always felt different. I always felt different, and I always felt afraid. I was like that big old duck, baby Huey, that big old clumsy duck. I grew up faster than I thought I was supposed to. All my friends were short. I mean, I wanted to be like Mary, 4'9", and adorable, helpless, that kind of woman that all men want to help. I mean, that's how I wanted to be, and I grew up to be like one of the guys. You know, they tap you on the shoulder and how's it going, sport? And that, you know, I think that's probably okay, but it was never my idea of who I wanted to be. I wanted to be lovely. I wanted to be cherished and treasured, and I was clumsy and awkward and ashamed. I felt shame from the time I can remember, and I didn't have to, because there are a lot of things similar in my life today, and I don't feel that same feeling, and that has a lot to do with you. I grew up drinking. After I turned 14, I did not give up drinking for 30 seconds. I drank every chance I got. Early on, I was just a weekend and over at my friend's drinker because it's hard to get alcohol when you're 14, but I found ways. And during that period of time was the 60s. They had all this other stuff going on, all this other major activity. Acid, they had reds and whites and yellows, and that, little social heroin periodically I got involved in, and I hung out with people. I used to spend time hanging out on corners like at Andrew's Burger with the Hessians and the Devil's Disciples, and I used to hide their guns for them when they would do armed robberies, and I was just like one of the guys. I was so much fun when I drank, and I would go to their parties, and their parties were good as long as you stayed awake. As long as you're awake, biker parties are fun. I mean, they are exciting, but if you pass out, you could come to on fire, because they used to throw lighter fluid and a match on people who passed out at their parties. I mean, there are any of you here, nothing personal, but in a group you are a little scary. And I never wanted to end up like that. I ended up a lot of other ways, but I never wanted to end up on flambe, so I took a lot of whites during that time, and I got involved in being chemically balanced. And I'm sure that a lot of people who grew up in the 60s understand what that's like. You drink just enough not to pass out. You take enough whites so that you can drink longer and have the most fun of anyone in the party. And then you take too many whites, so then you just get just a little too tight, and you have to take something to relax. So you drink some wine and you take some reds. And any of you who grew up in the 60s understand that it was a little difficult to be involved in heavy alcoholic drinking and not have a few drugs once in a while, because they were just there. I mean, at least they were for me. My favorite was that no-risk drug acid. I loved acid because you could take it and life happened for you. You know what I mean? It's like you take this thing and it's like having a movie in your head and it's your life. And you don't have to do anything. You don't have to humiliate yourself or embarrass yourself like I used to do when I drank. One of my fondest drinking memories was sitting in a bar. People always ask me how you know you're an alcoholic. And there are a few key points in my story. where I really knew I was an alcoholic. I was sitting in a bar and some guy was buying me wine. And I wasn't feeling very well that day, but I was drinking the wine because he was buying the wine. And I knew I was starting to get sick. So I figured he shouldn't buy me any more wine, because if he kept buying me wine, I would drink the wine and I would throw up on him. I knew it. I mean, I understood that, so I said, don't buy me any more wine. Well, he kept buying the wine. I threw up on him. And he said to me, why didn't you just stop drinking? How many times have they asked you that? Why didn't you just stop? I don't know. I could not stop drinking. It made no sense for me to drink most of the time when I drank, especially not that much, but I could not stop. Don't put it there if you don't want me to drink. That was my feeling. Another thing that happened is I had a friend who was a priest. He's still a priest. He used to drink. He doesn't drink anymore. You know why? It made him sick. He had 2 massive drinking experiences, both in Rome. When he was in Rome, he went out drinking liqueurs. He got sick. He didn't drink liqueurs anymore. Then they went out drinking brandy, and he got sick. He quit drinking. I said, for God's sakes, Teddy, why didn't you just leave Rome? That's what I would have done. And if you think about it, that's what we did. We just left. I'm not going to quit if I get sick. That is one of the differences between alcoholic drinking and non-alcoholic drinking. We don't think properly. They talk about alcoholic insanity. What it meant to me when I first got sober was I didn't have a problem with that step. I wasn't insane. I'd been released from Norwalk and I knew I was cool. What it means to me today is that I don't think like other people when it comes to alcohol. In spite of all evidence to the contrary, when I was drinking, I still thought, if I just drink in Toledo, if I just leave off the cherries, if I just don't put salt on the margaritas, this time it'll be different. This time I won't end up in jail. This time no one will beat me up. This time I will remember where I parked my car. Or was it your car? I don't remember. I mean, I had a difficult time when I drank. I got through school, and I went to several schools, because I got kicked out of school. I was not the most well-behaved student. And I had a lot of questions, and they weren't the kind of questions that you're supposed to ask in school. And I had another need when I was in school, and that was for attention. So I spent a lot of time being kicked out of classes because I disturbed the class. And I ended up in juvenile hall because I also spent a lot of time in public. And I drank where people could see that I was having fun. I mean, didn't you? Just hanging out with all the people and showing them how much fun I was having. So consequently, I got arrested. And I got arrested by some of the finest police officers in Orange County, almost every city. And I ended up in juvenile hall. And I ended up in reform school because when you go to juvenile hall too many times and your mother says that you're incorrigible, they put you in reform school. And I stayed there for 11 months. I learned nothing in reform school. And I'm telling you, I learned nothing, except for these little things that grow on bushes outside of the reform school are poisonous, and if you eat them, they pump your stomach. That's what I learned, and I ate them. And I got out of reform school, and I was 18 years old. I was on probation. I had nothing. I had not finished school because it was too hard. If it was too hard, I quit. That's another trademark I have. That's why I am amazed. Every morning I wake up and I am still sober and I am still here and I am excited about it. I am amazed because I have never done anything for any length of time and continued to do it and loved it. I quit. Any time it got hard, I left. And I was 18 years old the first time I ever came to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, my drinking experiences were as varied as anyone else's, as varied as Lindy's. Many of them ended me up in humiliating and degrading conditions. Some of them were funny. Some of them ended me up in jail. None of them were alike. Toward the end of my drinking, it was always the same. I was humiliated. I was ashamed of my life, and I couldn't stop. But in between, I had a lot of different experiences. I was 18 years old the first time I came here. I came to AA because somebody said, If you don't want to live like that anymore, I can show you another way. We say that. I didn't want to live like that anymore. I was living under a bridge down in Newport at the jetty. I was living down underneath that little jetty that they have there. I was kicked out of my family. I had no clothes other than what I was wearing. I had no job because I didn't like working, and I couldn't go to school. I wanted to go to school, but I couldn't go. So somebody brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And there are, that was a long time ago, like 68 or something. There were a lot of really old people in AA then. I mean, really old. We're talking 50. Got that? I was 18. 50 was really old. December, I'm going to be 50. It's like, it's nothing. 50 is nothing. New beginning. Isn't it, Tommy? Annie? New beginning. I love getting older. But when I was young, I thought that 5 years, 10 years, you're dead anyway. What's the point? I mean, what's the point of staying sober and being as miserable as you are when you don't drink when you're an alcoholic if you're going to die anyway in 5 years when you're 50? Who couldn't quit? So I decided when I was 18 I didn't belong here because I wasn't like you. And I left. I left Alcoholics Anonymous after a few meetings, meeting a few really interesting characters like Ada K. and Ruthie B. There were a lot of really interesting people around when I was 18. Otis was there then, nicest man in California. And I decided to leave. And I went out looking for something to do, and I decided, I should get married. I have never been married before. Everyone I know who is normal is getting married, having 2.5 children, and living happily ever after. And if you read any of the books I read, you knew that was true. Babies don't cry. You never have any problems. Nobody fights. You have that warm feeling. You run across fields and meet each other. I mean, that's the way it really is, isn't it? So I decided to get married, and I went looking for someone who would marry me. What I can tell you is, even if you are alcoholic, even if you are drinking all the time, even if you don't have a job, even if you don't have many clothes and you go barefoot, you can find a husband. I am telling you that. I found a husband. He said, "Will you marry me?" I said yes. And when I tried to get that marriage annulled a few years later, I didn't know enough to do it. I didn't know who his father was. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't ask any questions. That would be a bad idea today. At that time, it was just dumb. I married this guy. We had this lovely ceremony. Weddings are fun, aren't they? Weddings are the best part of any of the marriages I've ever been in. I love the wedding, the party and the drinking and the excitement and the looking forward to the future. It was after that was really hard for me. It was doing the laundry and cooking the food and cleaning the house and having someone else get to choose what we watch on TV and having to share. I mean, I wasn't good at sharing. I wasn't good at being part of a group. I wanted to be it. It. That's me. What I feel, what I think, what I want when I say. That's what I wanted. And when you're married, you can't do that. So I didn't stay married very long. I stayed married for a couple of years, and I decided to go to college and become a psychiatrist. If you knew what shape I was in when I decided that, you would think it's even funnier. I went to school, took all the appropriate classes, anthropology, sociology, psychology. I ended up in Norwalk State Mental Hospital, which is pretty much what you do if you're like me. I have done things that I could not look in the mirror the next day at myself without wanting to die. When I went to college, I had every intention of being a psychiatrist. And when I ended up in the nut house, I was humiliated. I did not understand how you could go from there to there. I did not understand it. But it was the thing that made me feel that I was normal when I came into AA and you said I had to work those 12 steps. Because I wasn't nuts. I knew it. I just wasn't like everybody else. What I know today is I'm like a lot of people. And you're all sitting right here. I'm like a lot of you. Hey, easy. Don't try to hide. I know you. I know what it's like to feel like you're the only one. When I was in the nut house, there were a lot of people in there who would talk about their drugs, and I used drugs too, but I was an alcoholic. And it was not popular to be an alcoholic during that period of time, and to be in the nut house talking about being an alcoholic. You know what? I couldn't stop drinking. It made perfect sense for a long time for me to stop drinking, but I couldn't do it. And I meant to. I meant to. People would say, do you want to drink? And then I would start again. That was what happened to me. People would have just left me alone. If we could have done like it says somewhere in our literature, in our book, lock me in a room, chain me to the bed, I probably would have never had anything else to drink. But I would have died, but I would have probably never drank again as long as I was chained up somewhere. But all someone had to do was... Is this like that Lucy show where they're doing swings in the back and stuff? Is that what this is? Is this plant going to get really, really big when it goes across the stage? Okay, you guys. And I'm really glad to be here. My life before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous is interesting only in... Oh, this is so funny! My life before I got to you is interesting only in the stark contrast that it provides to who you've allowed me to be with you. And I want to share that with you now. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous to stay when I was 25 years old. I had been married and divorced, been in the nut house, been released, and had nowhere to go. My family wasn't speaking to me. My parents had disowned me. My sister and brother were not allowed to speak to me because I would corrupt them. And I had no friends because I had stolen from them all. That's what I did. I never had a job before I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I used to steal things. I was really good at it, and there were a lot of things to steal. So I could support myself that way. I got sober when I was 25, and I walked into the meeting on a Thursday night over in Midway City. And there were all these people sitting around those rectangular-shaped tables, and they were saying they told me to sit down, that they were having a round table discussion. Now, how stupid did they think I was? That is not a round table. And I figured that they did that to all the newcomers just to test them, so I sat in the back of the room. And I listened. I did listen, but I didn't understand a whole lot about what you talked about. You talked about things like love. And where I came from and the way I came up, love was not something I understood or talked about. It was something I desperately needed, but I knew no one ever would. My parents didn't. I knew I was unlovable. A lot of things happened when I was very young to give me the feeling that I was damaged, and I carried that feeling well into my sobriety. Even with you, I was not one of the people who rushed into AA and said, oh my God, I'm home. I rushed into AA, and it was one more place I felt that I didn't belong. And it's to your credit that you've been able to change that, because I couldn't. And the fact that you stayed by me when I was in my most unlovable state in recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous has allowed me to feel that I belong here with you. I went to meetings, one or two here and there when I needed to. I went to some meetings when I was new. I didn't go to 90 meetings in 90 days because I didn't like people telling me what to do. It just irritated me. But I did get a sponsor because they said, pick someone you want what they have. And that sponsor I picked is here today. She used to say the F word from the podium. I loved her. I want what she has. She didn't care what anyone thought. She was so fun. And her name is Annie. And Annie has taught me as much in this last year and a half about spirituality and practicing the principles in all your affairs as anyone I've ever met. I hope you don't hate me, Annie, but my friend Eddie has cancer, and I hear people talk about how you can rely on the strength of God and that you can use people in Alcoholics Anonymous to help you through hard times, but I haven't really had to put it to the test all that often, and I have never seen anyone go through such a difficult period with such hope and with such excitement about life and with such willingness to help other people, which is what we're about anyway. And no matter what the news is, Annie makes it possible. And I got to tell you that you have helped me very much. I just want you to know. When I was new, I didn't know anything about God. I figured God was the kind of guy, if he finds out you want to live, he kills you. So you really ought not let him know that you want. Oh, man. I haven't done, I think this is lack of sleep is my dilemma. Anyway, that's how I felt about God. I really did not want God to know that I was excited about living, because I figured that'd be it for me. So I hung out on the fringes of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous for a very long time. I had Annie as my sponsor, and I took the world's shortest 4-step, because I did not have many problems. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have any. So I had a very small 4-step, and Annie allowed me to do that. When I first asked Annie to be my sponsor, she called her psychiatrist and asked him if I could make her sick again, because she had a problem with hostility. And he told her I could not rub off on her, that it would be okay. So we walked together, and we spent a year walking together, and she kept wanting me to do the damn steps. And I've got to tell you, they are hard, and I did not want to do them. I didn't want to do a real 4-step, because one of the things I knew in my deepest heart is that if you knew what I was really like and the humiliating things I had done in order to drink and survive, you wouldn't let me in. And at least you wouldn't sit by me. I knew it. So I didn't want to do any of that. Plus, you wanted me to turn my life and my will over to the care of God. And I went to church before, and I know God wants you to be good. Well, it's not my idea of a good time. I don't want to be good, so I'm not turning my will and my life over. Plus, he'll probably kill me anyway. So I don't want to do anything in your program, but I really like being there. And so I go to meetings, and I participate whenever people piss me off, which is usually, once a meeting. And because there are always people who are going to disagree with you, and I found it very easy to argue in Alcoholics Anonymous, very easy to have a different opinion than someone else. And what I know is everyone is right. Everyone is right. And there is no one who isn't allowed to be wrong in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is one of the few places I have ever found acceptance just the way I am, and not by everyone. I don't delude myself to think that you all accept me. I don't accept all of you. Some of you irritate me still. But if you needed anything from me in regard to your recovery from alcoholism, you would have it in a heartbeat, because that's what you've done for me. And that's what it was like when I was new. I was hostile and angry and afraid, and you allowed me to stay. And you made me feel that I belonged here, which is something I never felt before that. It took a few years, but I felt like I belonged here. The part that was hard for me was getting to the truth, telling you the truth about who I was and what I did and why I thought I was like I was, and all that little wormy things that happen when you're a drunk like I was. So I didn't. Frankly, I just didn't tell you the truth for a while. I just went to a lot of meetings, and I had my sponsor, and she wanted me to work all those steps, so got rid of her. She is my dear friend today, and that's because of Alcoholics Anonymous, because once people were dead to either one of us, they were dead for life, and Annie and I are very good friends. God, I was such an idiot when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thought I wasn't. I thought I was very, very cool, very impressive, that I knew so much. And the other thing I decided when I was sober about 10 months is that I really ought to get married again. That I had been unmarried long enough and single. It was hard being single, and I needed to have someone to help me with this. So I went looking, and we had this great club, the old Garden Grove Club, and they used to have alkathons. They would go on all night long, and they would get money for the Lifeline. Well, a lot of failed romance was spawned in those meetings, I've got to tell you. I met my second husband there. It was amazing. I went in, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning, and he got up to talk, and he knew everything about AA. He was 10 months sober too. And he had huge curly hair and big brown eyes. He was so good looking, and I knew immediately what God's will for me was. I knew God's will when I saw it, and if you think about it, when you're new, it can sound like God's will is whatever you want. That's God's will, because people say things like, well, I lost my job and I was really devastated, but then I got the best job I've ever had, God's will for me. I had no car, and then somebody parked this car in my driveway, and it's God's will for me. So I met this guy, this wonderful guy. I felt warm all over, and I knew it was love. That's as much as I ever knew about love. And I went over to talk to him, and my God, we were both 5 years apart in age. We were both a couple weeks apart in sobriety, both 10 months sober. We knew everything there was to know about AA, and we would tell people whether they wanted to know or not, and we both played the guitar. I mean, it was made in heaven. I knew it. So here and plus I had not read the book to that point, so I didn't have to be bothered with boy meets girl on AA campus. I mean, it wasn't part of my life. So we decided that we were meant to be together, and he went and told his wife and his kids what had happened. It's a lot funnier to you than it was to her. But she was really a nice woman, and she gave us the kids. So I know, a lot of people felt I deserved that. So here I was, 2.5 years sober. I'd barely worked any of the steps. I'd gotten rid of all my sponsors because they wanted me to work the steps. And I was sponsoring myself, and I have God's will. God's will for me. We get married, live happily ever after, and I have these kids. Well, you know how long happily ever after lasts if you're an alcoholic, and if you live in fantasy, about 6 months. That's about it for me. And I started realizing that I had made a grave error in judgment, and that not only was this man not the answer to all my problems, but he was starting to look like the reason for them all. And it happens. It happens to us. We know that if we just get this thing, it's gonna be okay. And we get this thing, and it's not okay. So it's got to be them. It can't be us. I mean, isn't that right? Can't be me. I didn't do it. I'm okay. I worked that step. Which one was that? The first one. I'm an alcoholic, powerless over alcohol. So I decided that it was his problem, and we had this conversation that went kind of like, are you going to change? No. Are you going to change? No. Goodbye. So we got divorced, and I hadn't realized how much power I had given him until he was gone. I hadn't realized how much my staying sober was dependent on what he thought of me and what other people thought of me because I was with him. When he left, it's kind of like how I never realized I was lonely until I'd been sober for about 3 or 4 years, and I experienced a brief moment of not being lonely, of belonging here, of feeling like I had friends. I had that moment, and then I realized how devastatingly lonely I'd been all my life. And that's how it was with him. And I realized how much I had given him, so I got involved. I had gotten this other sponsor by then, and I actually did the steps. I worked all of them, just like I had to, just in order, like I was one of you. I did the first step all the way through the 12 steps. And my sponsor at the time said, you probably should quit speaking from podiums, Diane, because you're lying. And people in Alcoholics Anonymous don't deserve to be lied to. And I must tell you, I agree with her, because sobriety is difficult. I'm not going to tell you that it's not worth it, because it is. It's worth every tear I've ever cried. It's worth every difficulty I've ever experienced, but it's difficult. I'm not going to tell you that you're going to get sober and no problems will ever occur in your life, because that's not true. But there has never been a problem in Alcoholics Anonymous that I have asked you for help for that I haven't gotten help. There have been a few that I didn't think you could figure out, so I didn't ask. But there has never been one that I asked you for that I didn't get the help. I got involved in general service at this point in my life. In my group, general service was like an outside agency. People booed the GSR in the meeting. They hated the reports. They thought it was boring and stupid. And what do the 12 traditions have to do with AA? That's what they used to say. What do they have to do with AA? Well, let me just tell you, in case you're wondering the same thing, the 12 traditions are the reason that Alcoholics Anonymous is still here and the Washingtonians aren't. That's it. So I got involved because she said that I needed to do something where I didn't lie to you. I was GSR. I was booed from many groups when I gave my report. I became secretary of the area, which is the only job I told God I did not want. I do not want to be the secretary. So I was elected secretary unanimously on the first ballot. And I did a good job. Actually, I worked with Goldine. Goldine was in service when I was in service. And there were a lot of people in service. My friend Jerry F., who had a stroke last year, and they thought he wasn't going to make it. And he is so funny. It's marvelous what Alcoholics Anonymous and the love of the people and just humor can do for you. And he's funny as hell. I was telling Goldine before I got up here that Jerry used to speak a lot from podiums, and he said to me the other day, he said, you know, I used to really like to talk. I think I still like to talk, but I just can't remember what to say. He had a lot of short-term memory loss, and he doesn't tie it together, but he's wonderful. That's what Alcoholics Anonymous does. And so I was elected secretary, and I did a good job. Then the next year I was elected delegate. And I was excited about being elected delegate until I got to New York. And there are a lot of people in New York who know a lot. And I have always been able to feel inadequate at the drop of a hat. If you know anything more than I know, I'm inadequate. I can't do it. I don't know what to do. And so I'm in New York, and there are all these adults there and me. And I'm thinking, I can't do this job. I don't know enough. I'm going to do something really stupid. They're going to impeach me. I know when I get back, they're going to impeach me. And so I was going to go home. And I told my friend George, who was the trustee at the time, I said, you know what, I just want to go home. I just want to go home because I feel like I'm not going to do a good job. I feel like I'm not good enough here. And he said, you know, Diane, one of these days you better quit worrying about how you feel and just do what they ask you to do in AA because it has to be done. No one's going to remember you were delegate, and I've got to tell you, he was right. As harsh as it sounds, he was right. No one remembers. Half the people I know don't know what a delegate is, don't care. Don't care. What they want to know is who I am, not what I am, what I did. There are things in AA that need to get done. There are people here, my friend Bob, a lot of people on the committee who do the things that need to get done in AA. In the meetings, there are people in my group who are sober 30 years who make coffee, who pick up the chairs, who put the chairs away. One of the things I learned when I was new that I was very, very slow to understand is that this program is created and the book was written to put me in touch with a power greater than myself so I could be fit to be of service to you and to him. If they told me that when I was new and I got it, I might not have stayed because being of service to you didn't sound like a lot of fun. It sounded like work. It sounded hard. I didn't like to do hard things. I must tell you that the greatest joy I have in my life today is being of service. And the way I got there was through a lot of pain. I spent a lot of time in Alcoholics Anonymous trying to figure out an easier, softer way to do it. And when I was sober, about 12 years, after I had gotten through being delegate, actually, and I was sober about maybe 12, maybe 13 years, I went to New York, to Montreal, to the International Convention. And what I had been doing, because things were getting more difficult and there were a lot of real life problems in my life and I just didn't want to deal with them, is I'd been moving really fast so they wouldn't catch up with me. I'd been speaking here and there and doing things and talking about how great it is and how great life is. I had been lying again. Not lying about recovery, because I believed, and I still believe, that if you do these things, the changes happen. I just wasn't doing the things anymore. I was talking. And I got back from Montreal and I sat down on my couch and I realized that my life was out of my control in a way that was making me ineffective. And I had gotten involved with someone when I was in general service. I had this urge again, which I hope dies soon. I'm hoping that it just atrophies and I don't get these urges anymore after a while, but I had this urge to love somebody again and to have some man change my radio station. So I went, I met some guy and he lived at a state and it felt like it would be safe. And so I got involved with this guy, and after about a year, he said, you know, I met someone else. You were okay, but she's great. And yeah. What I found out about myself was that no matter how many of you loved me at that point, no matter how many people thought I was wonderful, one person can say, you're okay, you're not good enough. And it all came back to me. Every feeling I ever had about not being enough, you would discover me, you would find out that I was a fraud, you would hate me. I was humiliated about my inability to ever be loved and to ever be okay. And I figured that I would never be good enough, ever, no matter what I did. And so I decided to quit AA. And it's like one of those, I'm going to leave my space for someone who deserves it more. Like one of those really pitiful things. If you go to a meeting and you say, I'm going to give my space to someone who deserves it because I just can't get it. Now, I hadn't had anything to drink for all those years, but I wanted more. I wanted more. I wanted everything. And what I found out is that you can't have everything. You got to make some choices. You've got to pay some prices. You just can't have everything. But at that time, that's what I wanted. So what I did, which was a big mistake, is I stayed home. I stayed home on my couch, and in my head, I kept talking about what a despicable, disgusting, low-life, pitiful human being I was. And I didn't take calls from the people I sponsored, or from the people who sponsored me, or from anyone. And I would go to work, and I would lock my little door, and I would do my work, and I would go home. And I told the receptionist, hold all calls. And what happened to me is my only reality became my head saying, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, and doggone it, nobody likes you. And that's how I felt. So I decided that I had to die. And the reason that I find it humorous now is because I feel like that every 6 months or so. I mean, every 6 months I feel a little sad. But I don't stay home anymore. And I guess why I'm sharing this with you is that if you feel like this and if you stay home, the possibility that you could kill yourself or drink again is very great, and you will not have the opportunity I had to find out that it doesn't matter what you do. If you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, there are people who will be there for you. It doesn't matter how useless you imagine yourself or how pitiful you are. There are people who will hold out their hands to you and make you feel like they've never met anyone finer. And the pain goes away. If you stay home, it's all you have. And that's what I did. I stayed home, and I ended up deciding to kill myself. And through a series of circumstances, because I had worked the 12 steps and I had built a foundation in AA, there was someone there when I went into the garage to put the hose in my car and turn on Mozart. There was someone there. And they took me to a hospital, and I was helped. I was helped by a delightful little man who reminded me of Mary Poppins with a goatee. He found something good and decent in everything. In all my little tragedies and my difficulties in life, he could find something positive. And he told me that I had to go back to AA meetings Now, I don't know how people stay away from here for years, because I was away for 2 months and I was absolutely lost. I was lost. He told me I had to go back to meetings and I had to let people love me. I didn't have to say anything, but I had to be there. And so I started going back, and he was so kind to me. And he spent a lot of time with me. He walked with me on the beach, and he told me that suicide was an angry, selfish thing to do to people who love you. They never deserved it. That if you kill yourself, they're left. They're left with the feelings that they could have done something, they should have done something. It's not fair. So after about 10 or 12 months, I started feeling like he's right. And I'd been going to meetings, and it gotten a lot better. And in November of 1986, he took a gun and blew his head off. And I want to tell you that for the longest time, I felt like it was my fault, that he'd been spending so much time with me, that he didn't have enough time to help himself, and he had given me so much, and why didn't I help him? And what I want you to know is there was nothing I could do. There are a lot of people in AA, in and out of the program, who will lead you to the light. They will show you the light. They will enable you to see it, and they can't see it. And I don't know why. I wish I knew why, because I would help them. Because that's why I think I'm here, is to be of service to you and to God. I didn't know how to help him, but I'm going to tell you this much. What he said was not a lie. Suicide is an angry, selfish thing to do to people who love you. And it's hard for them to get over it. It took me a long time, but you know what I did? I learned a valuable lesson from being depressed in my house all that time and being pitiful. What I did is I started going to H&I. I started going to a lot of H&I meetings. I started taking panels. I got a panel back in the juvenile hall I was incarcerated in as a youth. And I started talking to the kids about my life, about my recovery, about my feelings, about my value as a human being, and about their value as a human being. And I went once a month in the beginning, and then we got more panels, and I started going a couple times a month. And last year, I work for a publishing company. I actually have become self-supporting. I mean, and I actually like work. The first job I ever had, I got the job, I went to work, I worked 15 minutes, I took a break. I worked 15 minutes, I took a break. I learned how to work here because I didn't like it. I have this great job. I work for a publishing company, and we do auto racing magazines. And I've met a lot of really interesting people. And I met a guy who was racing in Japan for a long time, and last year he got an IndyCar ride, and he was the greatest guy. I've known him for 10 years, and his parents were alcoholic, and we used to talk about it. And I asked him one time if he would come out to juvenile hall and talk to the kids about, how he stayed with his dream and went and raced in Japan and did all the hard things in order to be an IndyCar driver, and so he did. Came out last June and talked to them, and in July he was killed in Toronto in an IndyCar race. And the kids were devastated because they felt like maybe the dreams died. And you know what I want is for people to know that people die, dreams don't die. And Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't die. It's our job to make sure that it doesn't die, that it stays there for people who need it. And so when he died, I started going back every week. And I started hanging out with these kids, and I showed them all the memorial stuff and talked about Jeff and answered any of their questions. And then I didn't know what to do with myself, so I started taking like cake and brownies, and we baked. And this is hysterical because I don't cook. I don't cook. I have never been domestic in my life. And I started taking these things, and I have my little Baking with Felons Wednesday night. I go out, and I go to the Felons unit where Jeff talks, and we take brownies and cake, and these little gangbangers and I bake snacks. And I need to tell you that had I had any good ideas about how God could use me, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be Wednesday night baking with felons, but that's something that makes me feel so good. One night we were baking, I left the eggs out. Have you ever seen brownies with no eggs? They are tight. So we put a lot of water in, and then they got really puffy. And not once have those kids ever told me that anything was bad, that it didn't taste right. Not once have those kids ever made fun of me or ridiculed me. Those kids are excited to see me on Wednesday night. And I need to tell you, that's what you did for me. You did that for me. I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. I had my head down. I was walking only because I was so angry, because I was so afraid. And I knew I would never fit in here. And you opened your arms and you opened your hearts and you told me, no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, we love you and God can use you. Please don't go. And that's what I want to tell you today. No matter where you've been or who you are or what you've done, we love you. God loves you. We need you. Please don't go away.